Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome. Oh, P.S. This is not Gia. This is Tanya. Um, Welcome today to another installment of Women Grows Lunch and Learn. This is when we pop on during the lunch hour of the day and give you some tidbits on learning new things. And our last segment we had Moranda Bromberg, founder of Hudson Valley Herbals, a New York State applicant for cultivation here in New York State. I said that. And we talked about earlier about the process of growing cannabis outdoors versus indoors, and really like what the differences are in East Coast versus West Coast. Well, today, based on the time of year, we are really approaching harvest time. So it is going to be time to learn how to harvest. New York State, we have homegrown, not yet, but it's on its way. So we just want to teach some skills and learn some new things. So as you are doing this or trying this, that you know kind of what you're doing. You have some insight from somebody who's actively doing. I'm going to bring up Moranda Bromberg from Hudson Valley Herbals. Hello, hello. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining me today. So let's jump right into it. It is currently harvest time or soon to be harvest time, I guess, depending on how soon you got your babies in the ground.
Yeah.
Um, and now would be the time to start the getting everything ready to do whatever you're going to do with your product. So the first question I have for you is, when is the plant, like when do you know that your plant is ready to harvest?
This one's pretty easy. So if you're looking at your plant or watching it grow, you're going to start to notice little fine hairs growing on the buds. And they'll start as like white or translucent, and they'll turn kind of brown and red. So once they're turning brown and red, that's when your plant is maturing, getting close to like the harvest point. And they're called pistils, these little hairs. You can see them with your naked eye. Once they're like 50% brown or red on the plant, your plant's ready to harvest. You can also use a magnifying glass or a microscope if you really want to like get in there. And then you can see like the trichomes, which is also cool. And that can also tell you when your plant's ready. But the easiest way for a home grower is just look at these little hairs. As they turn brown, your plant's ready. You can start cutting it down to harvest.
Okay, and so now when you say cut it down,
Mm-hmm.
I I thought at one point that and this was a long time ago, so nobody judge me. I thought at one point that cannabis was like a perennial, so
Mm-hmm.
that you could have it and you could like you could pick your little buds off and it'll keep growing and you'll just have this annual regrowing cannabis plant. Clearly, and sadly, I
Yeah,
was mistaken.
that would be great.
Right?
Yeah,
It
that'd be
would
awesome.
be. But that is not the case.
No.
So when you say to harvest, that we're chopping the whole thing down,
Yeah,
correct?
I wouldn't even cut down the stalk because it gets really thick. I just like cut the stems off the actual plant that have the buds on them, and you just take these kind of like whole branches that have your multiple buds on them, and you can like hang those to dry, but you can also just like take them off, put them in a bin, and bring them to your next step, which is like your processing. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
So, So, if I was a home cultivator,
yeah,
I would pretty much do the same thing.
yeah.
I've seen cannabis plants in real life, and had the opportunity to go up to Tricola Farms, which is a woman-led farm upstate, and go through that process. And it was you really have really big, beautiful,
Yeah.
magical things, and they have a drying section. I guess we'll get to that next. Let me make sure that I'm not
Yeah.
jumping ahead. So do we cut down the whole things, drying and curing? This part I don't really understand, so I would
Yeah.
really love for you to talk about, how do you properly dry and cure?
Yeah.
What's the process, etc.?
Yeah, this is honestly the most like important step and the most detailed. So, your plant to dry needs like typically 2 to 7 days to dry, but it needs really specific conditions. So, like your humidity has to be right, your temperature has to be right, and you want to do this in a dark room. Darkness is super important because if there's light streaming in onto your plants after you've cut them down and you're drying them, they can dry unevenly. The inside might be wet and the outside might be dry. And then you've like ruined this beautiful product that you spent all this time growing.
Right. Could that inhibit mold at that point? If you,
yeah,
okay.
That's why you really want to control like your humidity too. So having just like, you can buy a cheap dehumidifier at the store and just put that in a room with your plants, put down, blackout curtains or put up shades or whatever you have. And you want to control the humidity between like 55 and 65% humidity. You can buy a little thermometer that tells you humidity levels and put it in the room with your plants. This is when you can kind of decide, like, do I want to dry my whole bud? So you cut down the plant, you take the stem and you cut the buds off, or you can hang up the whole stem that you've cut off your plant and you can hang those up and those can dry as well. That method with the whole plant will take longer to dry. So,
right, makes sense.
And this is a smelly process, to be fair. So if you're doing this in your house, it is going to smell. You're going to want to like shorten probably the time that you're doing this. And if you want to do that, then breaking it down into like individual buds and drying them on screens, like mesh screens or racks, is ideal. That way they have like airflow.
Right.
And then you're also going to want to keep the temperature pretty consistent between like 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's any warmer than that, you can start breaking down the buds. And if it's any lower than that, you actually can lose trichomes under 50 degrees Fahrenheit. You can lose some of the terpenes. Sorry, not trichomes, terpenes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's really the most essential process.
And I know why we dry, obviously, because consumption is more difficult for a wet bud.
Yeah.
Or moist bud. But like, what does the curing process do? What is it for?
Yeah. The curing process is super important also because it is what helps get rid of chlorophyll in your cannabis, and chlorophyll makes it harsh to smoke. And when you let it cure, so you're essentially just like taking your dried product, putting it in an airtight jar, and you're keeping, again, the temperature, the humidity, and the light consistent. And that can take 2 weeks to a month. But they're just sitting in airtight jars, and that really helps lock in the taste and smell of your plant, but also draw out the moisture from the center of the bud. That way, when you smoke it later, you're not gonna have any issues. It's not gonna be fizzling. It's not gonna have excess moisture in the center of your
bud. Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine, like, I know the curing process takes however long it takes, but when you do store, I know a lot of people store it in dark jars with like a humid pack or something like that, so that your stuff doesn't turn into dust, basically. So okay, cool. So now, when to start trimming? It's not my most favorite thing to do. Because I did not realize how precise the trimming process is a process. So let's talk trimming. When do you start trimming? What's the best and how? Like, if you were teaching someone how to trim, what would, because again, being a novice back in the day, I just thought that this plant grew these beautiful buds. I didn't make the correlation into the leaf into the buds. But the flowers, although I found out now, have a lot more medicinal benefits than I originally thought. We are looking for those flowers, right? Those leaves.
Yes. You want to definitely trim the large leaves. If you're going to dry, you might as well cut off the large leaves. That's pretty easy to do. So there's kind of two camps. There's like wet trimmers and dry trimmers. Wet trimmers will trim leaves and like kind of all the excess around the buds before they dry the product, because then it dries faster. Taking all these leaves off. And then there's people who just like to dry kind of the whole plant, and then they dry trim. So after the plant's dried, they'll do like a proper trimming of all the excess leaves. But then when your plant is cured, or either after drying or after curing, you can also like finely trim your bud, which when you hear about like people trimming in California, like that's what they're doing. They're like shaping up these little buds into beautiful, perfect, like sellable product that looks great, And that means like you're cutting off like the little leaves that are on the outside of the plant, and like any excess, little twigs or anything that's sticking out that doesn't look nice and doesn't look like a perfectly trimmed bud. That's what these like trimmers are doing. And there's like professionals who do this all around the country. And yeah, it is excruciatingly boring to do if you're trimming a lot of weed.
But I would think like when you say there are people that trim and that's what they do, they're trimmers.
Yeah.
The end product that we all look at and go, oh my God, that's so pretty, is kind of as a result of some of these trimmers really loving what they do.
Totally. 100%. Okay. There are people who are so fast and they trim like a pound an hour. I don't know how they do it, but like they are professionals and this is what they do, and God bless them.
Literally.
Yeah.
God bless them.
Yeah.
So is there a purpose, or not purpose, but is there something to do with the trimmings? Like, what could you use them for?
Yeah. So they have like lower percentages of like cannabinoids in them, obviously, but you can still make like butters and oils from them. You can steep them in a fat, because they're fat soluble. So you can steep them. You can make tea out of them. There's like a lot of options that you can do with trim. And you can also you can take trim and you can put it over like a fine mesh kind of screen. And then you can like sift out the keef. And then you can use the keef to make hash or whatever other kind of product you want to make. Most like trimming trays have like a top bin and then a fine mesh bottom. And then underneath, they're always collecting the keef. So when you're like trimming professionally, you'll end up with like a ton of keef, and you can make like
I would imagine that
bricks of hash if you want from that.
That would be magical.
Yeah.
And I have a good friend of mine who uses the leaves from her friends that cultivate. She's an artist, and she uses the leaves in her art, which is actually, cool. I mean, it's not necessarily a way to consume it, but I consume art in some ways, you know what I mean? So I think that was pretty cool, so there are many, many ways to do this.
Yeah.
So we've harvested and we've cut down our plants. We've trimmed it. We've got these beautiful buds. We figured out what we could do with the leftovers, because I'm a person, I want to use the entire plant. Like, I have a friend who did a cultivation and something about a root ball. She used the root ball to make tea.
Oh, cool. I've never seen that done, but that's very cool.
I mean, she said she was like totally talk about milking cannabinoids any way humanly possible. So that she made a tea from the root ball, which is segues to our next conversation about extracting.
Yeah.
Which is one of I am not a cultivator. I have horrible allergies. So trimming, I walk out looking like I got punched in the face. But extraction is exciting.
Yeah.
So what are some extraction methods that we could talk about?
Yeah, I think at home extraction has become like so much easier now because there's so many products on the market available to people. I'm a flower girl. I love to smoke weed. So I don't make edibles at home a lot, but in my like professional life, the amount of ways that you can extract at home is so much more accessible now to people. One of the easiest ways is obviously just to use a fat and to steep your product, grind. All you need is a grinder and a double boiler, and you can make any type of butter or oil, and then you can cook with that, or just straight up like tincture, put it under your tongue. I think that's one of the easiest and safest ways. Alcohol extraction and like, butane extraction at home. Well, not alcohol, sorry. Ethanol extraction and butane extraction at home are like dangerous and somewhat expensive. So those are not ideal. But you can also, make rosin at home. You can make hash at home. You can use a hair straightener and a piece of parchment paper and make your own hash at home. It's super easy. Like there's so many methods to extract at home.
It's so funny. I have a good friend who was doing pressing with, he was trying to press rosin through a flat iron.
Yeah.
And he was like, I keep having to go back and buy new flat irons, and everyone's starting to get curious. I'm like, why? He goes, because I'm bald. And he was like, going in there buying all these flat irons to make rosin. But they have rosin presses now that you could purchase at home, which is pretty awesome. And every extraction machine, from a Ardent, which happens to be a women owned brand, Levo, Magic Butter, all those different types of devices. And I've even used a sous vide for extraction. Thank you, Monica Lowe, if you're watching. I love you. So have you noticed in the extraction, and we didn't even talk about that process right before, which is the decarboxylation process.
Yeah.
That's an episode. We'll talk about that another day, but we have to prepare our cannabis for the extraction process. And then, right. Somebody said something here. Extraction and infusion are different. Yes, she's right. We extract the cannabis, the cannabinoids, and then infuse it into something else. And in this case, we're talking about the infusion process, infusing it into some sort of a delivery method that you might want.
Yeah.
Is there an odor in this extraction process?
Yes. I'd say once you harvest your plant is when it actually gets stinkier. I feel like people think when it's on the actual plant, it's like when it smells most strong. But no, once you're drying it and curing it and like processing it, it's going to be much stinkier. Right. I mean, it smells good in my opinion, but it's
delightful, right?
But it's definitely going to smell. So you would want to be conscious of that for sure.
And then, does the extraction need to sit, or can it be used immediately?
So my experience is obviously limited in this way, but when I make like edibles at home and butters and oils, they don't need to sit. You can use them immediately. Obviously, if you're using something like a rosin press, I don't necessarily think it needs to sit, but I do think it benefits from staying cool and dry and, in a dark place before you use it. But
so now we've got our infusions or our extractions and then infusions.
Yeah.
And we want to, store things properly. I store things where they're, like you said, we've said this a bunch of times, where you monitor their humidity even after the fact.
Yep.
You want to make sure that things don't dry out or get too moist where they can inhibit any mold.
Yep.
But we also want to, get ready for next year, right? So what do we do to prepare for the next season? If are we getting our seeds from the plants that we've harvested? Like, how does that work?
So you wouldn't want to be getting seeds from the plants you're harvesting, because hopefully they would have no seeds in them, right? Like,
understood. See, I missed that. Yes. Yeah.
So you'd want to get your seeds, of course, in order. I think you can buy feminized seeds, which are more expensive, but they're super helpful because you don't have to sex your plants once they grow. So yeah, you want to have your seeds in order. It really depends. Are you growing outdoors, indoors, or in a greenhouse? What you can do next. If you're growing outdoors, the end of your season is typically October when you harvest. You can't really put plants in the ground in October. They'll be too cold. Right. But you can definitely prepare for your next season. You can start vegging your plants. You can have, indoor veg plants ready for the next season. So you can like put your plants in the ground as soon as possible. Obviously, if you're growing inside, you can go right on to your next,
That's right.
Which is great. If you're growing in a greenhouse, you can also probably do the same thing. You can extend your season out farther. But for like the home grower, if you're growing, under a couple lights in your house, like you can definitely just start again and do your next grow.
I know a lot of folks are really trying to, or getting themselves prepared to grow outside, and I look forward to that. Harvest time is coming. We're connecting with some farmers to see, like we've done this in the past, where we go, it is really fun to see the fruits of your labor, You know, I'm growing carrots right now on my terrace. I cannot wait. You
Yeah.
know, I'm preparing to grow carrots as I prepare to grow cannabis when
Yeah.
we're able to do so.
Totally.
And someone else, so Deborah here. Deborah, we you might need to connect with us. So, what is Deborah said? This is the season to start cuttings.
Okay.
I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means?
Um, I assume she's talking about like clones or to you can cut from your mother plants, your best plants, and you can start vegging and start.
That makes sense too.
I
That would collapse the time frame there, I would imagine also, right?
Yeah, you can also stack all these processes on top of each other so that you're always vegging plants, so that you always have plants ready to go for the next cycle. I only
So
really
then you have a continuous cycle of
yes,
planting, growing, harvesting, all that other good stuff, and you keep going that way, right?
yeah. I've actually never grown from cuttings, but I'm impressed by anyone who does that. It's a simple process, but it's difficult.
I love it because when we were up in Massachusetts a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, and they had homegrown, they had implemented their program, and it was really wonderful to see home cultivators growing things that like could be on like the pinup page in High Times magazine.
Yeah.
Like remember back in the day where they had like the
Absolutely.
centerfold, and I'm like, really, you grew that?
Yeah.
You know, he goes, not the first run, but over time. And I think that I'm excited to see what cultivators like yourself and home cultivators like some of the ones in our Women Grow community do to really get this stuff going. And I'm excited. Is there anything you want to share with us as we kind of wrap up about harvest time, etc.?
I mean, harvest time's my favorite season because you've worked so hard to grow this plant, and then you get to cut down this beautiful, amazing buds and grow them. I mean, dry them, and it's super exciting. I think like my only tips would be at home, like extraction and at home drying and curing are like actually super simple. There's like so much information online. You don't have to be afraid to look it up online and like read and do research. Like this is going to be legal to do at home. So I think just the easiest thing is like you don't have to spend so much money on stuff like on the products, whatever. Like if you're doing this at home for the first time, like it's a process. You'll figure out what works best for you, what works best for the plants that you grew, the strains that you grew. It all is like, different depending on what strain you grew as well. Like you can change your process for what works best for you. But it's like relatively simple and like not scary to do at home.
It's like sun, water, and nutrients.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm a plant.
Yeah. You need the right
All
temperature.
I need is sun, water, and nutrients. That's all I require.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Miranda, thank you so much. We're going to let everybody continue to enjoy their lunch hour. Thank you again for joining us. I know we have another segment coming up soon, and I hope we're going to do some on your farm in the later part of the year. We'll come up and visit. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Women Grows Lunch and Learn. Thank you, Moranda Bromberg of Hudson Valley Herbals, for joining me today. And we will talk to you very soon. Have a great one, everyone. Let me get our exit music, and we are out.